Hi, welcome to the Rittners Floral School in Boston, Mass. I'm Dr. Steve Rittner, and it's a pleasure to welcome you into one of our classrooms today. We've got a neat demonstration planned for you. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. What our subject is going to be today is we're going to make a lily vase arrangement, out of lilies. And I know you guys are really going to enjoy this because we've got a really cool demonstration planned for you. We've got a container. It's not a small one. It's a fairly big container. It's got foam inside of it. We've got foam that's secured to the top of it, and we're just about ready to go. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably wondering, what kind of lilies are we going to be playing with? Well, we've got a real treat for you today because we've got several really neat things. One thing that we're going to be playing with are some of our oriental lilies. Aren't these gorgeous? They're absolutely amazing. They're huge. They're colorful. They give just a beautiful presence. They are just absolutely amazing. I know my students tease me. They say, Dr. Steve, there's not one flower out there that you don't like. Well, it's true. Every particular botanical brings something unique and special to the design table. And these amazing lilies that were brought to us by petaldriven.com are truly incredible. We have been enjoying them so much. So we're going to play with some of our oriental lilies to begin with, and I'm going to take several of my oriental lilies, and I think you'll find the way we handle them will be kind of interesting, because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my oriental lilies, and I am going to place something right here as a focal. In other words, it's right facing towards us as a focal. The flower is big enough to be able to do something like that and come up with a pretty neat effect. I'm also going to take another one, and just bear with me, my viewers. I pull it off my bench and put it into the arrangement, cut it for our use, and then we'll place it into the design. I'm going to cut another one, and I'm going to keep it fairly small, and I'm going to place this one slightly over to one side. So I have one as a focal, and I have another one of my oriental lilies slightly to one side. Now, I could go in many different directions, as I'm sure you're aware. When we're dealing with this kind of flower, this thing could become amazingly complex and amazingly large. But we're going to play with something else today that I think is really neat. I have a lily here that I have never seen before. I think that this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. This is called a martagon lily, Now, this lily is a tiny itty-bitty lily. Look at it compared to my hand. It is much smaller than this one. It's one of these flowers that you look at it the first time you see it and you wonder, it's a lily, but it kind of feels more like an orchid, but it feels like a lily. I mean, I looked at this when it first came in from the folks at petaldriven.com, and I was thinking, wow, it almost feels like a stem of mini cymbidiums, but it's definitely a lily. When you look at it, you can see the individual flowers, the little petals. It's just absolutely amazing. Martagon lily, first time we've ever seen it, first time we've ever played with it. It is a very cool flower. And what we're going to do is we're going to play with some of our martagon lilies on this design. And I think you'll find our treatment here is going to be kind of interesting, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a martagon lily, and I'm placing it right up here. And you can see this is not going to be a teeny tiny design by the time we get through with it, but we're handling it a little bit differently than you may have expected us to. I'm going to take a second martagon lily, and again, using a similar kind of thing, I'm pruning it slightly, and I'm going to place a second one over slightly to one side here, and I'm going to take a third one. I think you'll really find that some of these materials are just so darn cool. You can do some very neat things. Now, when I announced, my viewer, that I was going to make a lily arrangement, I betcha that this was kind of like the last thing you really expected me to start doing, playing with lilies that are massive in size, and then playing with a small spray type lily that just gives a really neat effect. Let's add a little bit more. And I'm going to take another stem of my martagon lily, and I'm going to place it over here, slightly to one side over here. And then finally, I'm going to take one more and place it over to this side. So you can see, my viewer, I'm coming up with something rather interesting using my Martagon lilies. Now, I could stop at this point if I wanted to, but wait, there's more. This feels very, very pretty. It's interesting. We're using prestige materials, but I want to come up with some sort of contrast. And to come up with some sort of contrast, I'm going to take my branchy stuff, and I'm adding some of my curly willow up here. And I'm going to take a very, very healthy piece of my curly willow, and I'm going to add it over onto this side here. In other words, I'm going to give a contrast between the rigidity of my stems. They are fairly straight. And then by using some of my curly willow, I'm going to come up with contrast to it and come up with a very, very interesting kind of an effect. So that notice I'm playing with different things here. I'm playing with the concept of scale, because we do have a scale thing between our large oriental lilies and our Martagon lilies that are much smaller. And then I'm also playing with the concept of things that are a little bit more kind of way out in terms of moving around, giving us fluidity, along with things that are a little bit more linear, and playing with it that way. We can come up with some really, really cool effects doing this. And you'll notice, my viewer, this is coming together so nicely for me and so easily. I'm going to take another piece of my curly willow and again place it over on this side. This is a design that is not teeny tiny. This design is a fairly good sized piece. It is a fairly large piece. But notice, my viewer, how it is coming together so easily for me. I'm going to cover my mechanics. In this particular case, I'm taking some of my moss material, and I'm going to use some hairpins using wire. The hairpins are basically a U-shaped piece of wire, and I'm using a fairly heavy piece of wire to do it, to hold them in place, because it's always considered good workmanship to cover your mechanics, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm taking some of my moss and putting it in here. I could use some of my foliage materials on this as well if I wanted to. However, I am deliberately using moss, and the reason I'm using moss is I don't want my foliages to compete. I want these lilies really to stand out very, very nicely on their own. And I would work it not only on the front and on the top as I'm doing it here, but I would also work it going around towards the sides and the back. So you can see, my viewer, I have quite an interesting show here. This design is big. I had to stand on a little stool in order to make it. It is a fairly good sized piece. And again, when we move in close and we look at it, you can see all of these amazing Martagon lilies, and then they're all kind of working around. They're working around our oriental lilies as well. And then we have something going upwards in terms, and to the sides in terms of our curly willow. So what do you think, my viewer? I've always said that at Rittners Floral School, we believe that floral designing should be quick, easy, and fun. And making use of these amazing lilies, our oriental lilies, and these amazing Martagon lilies, which I've never seen before, from the folks at petaldriven.com, we've come up with quite an interesting composition, and I've thrown it together. Quick, easy, and fun, the Rittner Floral School way. On behalf of all of us here at Rittners Floral School, I'm Dr. Steve Rittner. We want to thank you for coming in and viewing this brief demonstration. We hope you enjoyed it, and go out and get some of these things and diddle with them, because I think you'll find you can really come up with some very, very neat results. Thank you for coming in and visiting with us today.